to this Birds of a Feather session today. Today's session is titled Coordination of Data Preservation with the Paper Peer Review Process, or Coordinating with Publishing Workflows. This is a session to socialize and introduce a proposed working group of the ESIP RDA Earth, Space, and Environmental Science Interest Group. My name is Natalie Rea. I'm a postdoctoral research associate in the School of Information at the University of Arizona. I'm joined today by my co-chairs for our group, Danny Kincaid, who's the director of the Biological and Chemical Oceanography Data Management Office, or BICO-DEMO, at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. I'm also joined by co-chair Matt Wark, who's the Geoscience and Paleontology Journals Portfolio Manager at Taylor and Francis Publishing Group. Eventually, we will hopefully be joined by Leslie Wyborn, who's an adjunct fellow at the National Computational Infrastructure Facility and Research School of Earth Sciences at the Australian National University. And we're also fortunate today to have Shelley Stahl, who's the Vice President for Open Science Leadership at the American Geophysical Union, as well as Kirsten Leonard Doherty, Senior Research Scientist at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, which is part of Columbia University. We go to the next slide.
Yeah, that was such a great opening. That was so impressive. You got everybody's affiliations in there. That was a mouthful.
Okay, so some objectives for today. We're hoping really, again, to introduce this working group and our goals and where we're at in our status, including further socializing the problem of data publication workflow, mismatches between repositories and journal publishers, and we'll hear more about that in a moment. We're going to share and review a draft of the existing case statement for establishing the working group, and talk about some of the deliverables, and hopefully have some really good discussion about whether we're missing any stakeholders in this draft case statement, potential collaborations with other RDA working groups, and then really just have some discussion and solicit your input and your feedback and have some good discussion. Next slide. And so this is what our agenda looks like. In a few minutes, Shelley will give us an introduction to the problem. We're going to have some key features from the repository and the publisher side. And then Danny will take over and introduce some of the working group goals. And then we'll have some discussion about the case statement and the deliverables and timeline. And so I think with that, I will hand it over to Shelley.
Yeah, thanks so much, Natalie.
Thanks, Natalie. Could someone move on to the next slide, please?
Yeah, I seem to be challenged there. I apologize.
I had one more slide.
One more.
Super important. Please add your name, affiliation, country, and email to the meeting notes, which we will circulate in the chat here, and you're welcome to keep up with those notes if you wish during the session. Now handing over to Shelley.
Okay, great. Before I start on this slide and talking about it specifically, I think it's important to recognize that RDA has had a working group already that has put out important recommendations on the workflow between publishers and repositories, and we that definitely informed the case statement here for this particular working group. And one of the challenges that we have, so let me put my publishing hat on and identify the fact that this group is really focusing on discipline-specific repositories, those where there are data curators, data managers, and and support for researchers on metadata that allows those data sets to be more fair. And one of the beautiful things that's happening at AGU this year, 2024, is that our papers, 95% of them all have a data citation. What is not okay is that we drive them to the easiest solution because we're asking for it in a timeline that seems to them, because they're focused on getting their paper published, that seems to them very little time. And we want to break that. We want them to be able to have the time necessary to get that data well documented. And the numbers there are, of those data citations, more than 70% go to Zenodo. So we don't have enough guidance yet on, this is an opportunity for RDA, enough guidance yet on what data should go, what type of data should go to what type of repository. But in my opinion, over 70% of data set citations being in Zenodo is too many, which means we have a problem. The data that needs to be in repositories that take time for curation need to be highlighted in a different way. So that is my version of this challenge. And so let's look at how that connects in. During conversations with Danny and other discipline-specific repository managers, the process that happens within publishing is very opaque. So when you see little awareness and communication, there is that first bullet. First of all, we're assuming that that publisher actually has a policy for a data citation. So that's a challenge that other groups at RDA have taken up, and that continues to be worked on. Here, we're talking about the intent on actually getting your data preserved with a DOI. That's an assumption at the moment. And then how to make sure that the communication between the repository and the publisher is healthy, such that if that data should have been in a repository that takes time, Pangaea is a really good example within Europe. It takes several weeks for Pangaea to process a data set, get all of the metadata necessary, and generate that, register that data to get the DOI. And that is just how it is. And researchers are caught unaware sometimes when the publisher says, I need that data citation. And they don't want to take another 6 weeks to get it. They want their paper published. So the workflows that we have for our domain discipline-specific repositories take time. They are thoughtful. They are taking data sets that are in any shape whatsoever and getting them into a standard shape that benefits that discipline. And then we have muddying the water when our publishing community, and Matt knows this challenge, and many on this call know this challenge, our publishing community is trying to do best by their authors, and they're trying to make recommendations for repositories or criteria, but they're not considering the actual repositories themselves. So that, I think, is getting rectified in these last couple of years. I think Danny and other repository managers have been voicing their concerns about that. And we just had a recommendation, Bridget, I don't know if you can pop it into the chat, but a recommendation from a working group that just finished that is represented by repositories and publishers on those what those criteria should be. And sorry to put you on the spot there, Bridget. I can find it in a minute if you don't have time. So there are lots of bottlenecks, and we need to have a way to move forward where repositories know more about what's happening within publishing, and the publishers are more aware of the different types of repositories and how to guide their researchers to the best possible. Yes, the Data Repository Attributes Working Group, that I believe that's it. They just put out a recommendation, and they just presented to the organizational assembly either maybe 2 months ago, I think. I don't know if that comment was public or not, but Bridget was asking me which one exactly. Next slide. So the team's been working on this. They've been trying to figure it out. And it's been taking some time to uncover all of the layers and then get the socialization out there for interest. And it's really delightful to have everybody here. And hopefully anybody who watches this recording later will feel like they can be part of this group as well. So CDF is the Council for Data Facilities. That's a funded group, was a funded group through EarthCube from the National Science Foundation in the United States, and had a number, mostly discipline-specific repositories, but also others. The concepts were shared at ESIP, which is the Earth Science Information Partners. Their, I'm going to say July meeting, because depending on what hemisphere you're in, it may or may not have, may or may not have been summer. And then on to RDA, the Virtual Plenary 16, and more sharing. We had communications. I can't remember if it was a town hall or not, but we did share all of this at the December meeting for AGU. So fall, it's called the fall meeting. It isn't anymore because it's not fall for everybody. Humor there on the international challenges that we all have. And then back to the January ESIP meeting in 2021. And then we had a workshop, which was really well attended. But COPDES ran. COPDES, for those who may not know, is the Coalition on Publishing Data in the Earth and Space Sciences. And Kirsten Leonard and a number of other folks on this call are part of COPDES, including myself. And there was a workshop that we held, which that recording is available for those who are interested. And we continue to socialize. And Danny is gathering people who can help think this through. And it really is going to take both repositories and publishers to take a look at this and dig in and help solve the problem of making sure the data gets to the right place. Danny, did I do okay?
You did wonderfully. I am remiss at putting an outdated timeline slide up here. So we actually have worked since 2022 on this, and Shelley did phenomenally at recalling all of the prior effort here. But we in 2023 started getting the working group together as if we are formed, and started to really hash out the case statement, which is what we hope to present to all of you today a little later. So apologies on the slide. We didn't drop off at 2022. We've been actively working, and I want to give a shout out to the co-chairs on the call here. It looks like Leslie might have joined us, so welcome, Leslie Wyborn, and also Natalie and Matt, who have joined recently and are instrumental at sort of representing the community and also helping to keep the momentum going on this working group. All right. So thank you, Shelley. Oops. Okay. Next up for the repository perspective, we have two really short talks that are associated with the different perspectives of stakeholders that are in this sort of larger data publication landscape here. The first speaker, Kirsten Leonard, is going to be representing the repository, and help me out. It's Astromat, Kirsten? Yes. Oh, you're muted. And I think
the Astromaterials data system, and Astromat is the abbreviation.
Thank you. And Kirsten, did you get your slides into the slide deck?
No,
or
I did.
I shared the link late.
So
I
need to
you want to
share my screen.
Sure, I will stop sharing, and you should, I think Bridget successfully made you a co-host, so you should be able, perfect. We see it.
Yeah, it's just few slides, but it's not going into presentation mode. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's very quick, and it's focusing on a specific problem that Astromat has. So as we said, it's the Astromaterial data system, and it's a new kid on the block, so to say, that NASA is funding now as the designated data system for all the lab analytical data acquired on samples that are returned from space, from the moon, from asteroids, and so on. And we have a specific challenge, and that is that in our process of data curation that I'm showing here in the whole pipeline of data that we take care of, we have a new requirement from NASA that data acquired into our archive goes through an external peer review. We have in the sister so to say, of this archive is EarthChem. We have a lot of experience with managing data sets from publications. They have the same challenges as, Shelley and Danny were already talking about, but this external peer review really adds another dimension of complexity to it. And we have been working to plan out the process of external peer review, but it's incredibly challenging. And this is in part due to the diversity of data. We're getting data from 65 different methodologies in none of them really has internationally endorsed standards from the community. And the biggest challenge, I think, in this context of coordinating with journals is the volume of the data submissions. Just from the OSIRIS-REx mission, we're expecting about 12,000 data sets over the next year. So considering that, we need to process that data, we need to send it to reviewers, get their review back to investigators who have submitted and so on will obviously take some time. And I've calculated that we would need actually 6 additional FTEs, full-time employees, to manage this. So we're still in a bit of a difficult situation. And we have laid out our senior digital archivist, Bob Downs, who you're probably familiar with. Bob has created a workflow for us. But as I said, it's going to be a challenge to implement this workflow for this volume of data. So I've just listed a number of questions that immediately come to my mind when we're talking about this coordination between repository and publisher. What is the role of the manuscript reviewer versus the external data reviewer when we're reviewing specifically the data? How can we coordinate that and potentially take advantage that there are 2 different review processes that we can consolidate that on, and then we actually need to ensure that authors are aware of the time required for us to send the data out to an external review, which will obviously delay the publication of a manuscript. One other issue that has come up already in our workflow is the issue of the complex data citation. We're getting the first papers for the OSIRIS-REx mission, which have a huge amount of different DOIs to cite, and that community has decided we cannot use something like a reliquary. So how do we work with publishers on actually implementing citations of tens or hundreds of different DOIs in a single paper? That was sort of my comment. And I can, oops.
That's huge. Thank you so much, Kirsten. That's a big, thorny, ugly problem. I think it's okay. I mean, I haven't discussed with the rest of the co-chairs, but I think it's okay to have this little Q&A time because we're not breaking out into any breakouts in this session. We're going to have a large group discussion. And so I think it would be helpful if, Kirsten, I don't know if you have the time to stay on to answer any questions, but it would be wonderful if anybody has either some thoughts on the questions Kirsten's posed or any additional comments on things like that. The first thing that came to my mind was maybe to Matt and Shelley with your publisher hats on, if it's possible that that journals would be amenable to combining this sort of data peer review, because any domain or disciplinary repository would love to have peer review, but it's also frightening because of the time involved and the effort. So, there's both a sort of, ooh, that looks shiny and interesting, but frightening at the same time. And for my repository, we have folks who, we process the data, and then of course it has to get reviewed by the submitter because we've gone through all this processing, and the data may look very different, but certainly not peer review. And so I guess my question to you both is that something that journals have the capacity for right now? do reviewers actually have any kind of expertise in that? And I just see Kirsten had to leave, so we don't have her to answer any more questions, but please go ahead, Matt or
Oh,
Shelley.
she's
I
here.
see your hand up.
She's still here. I think she just went off camera. She's still here.
Oh, okay, great.
I mean, so the way that, so two things, and I know Matt's going to have more to say here. And Matt and I work, Matt and Taylor, or AGU and Taylor and Francis work really well together. So it's really good to have Matt here. There's a couple ways to look at it. There are specialty journals, like JOSS, the Journal for Open Science, Open Source Software. Not to be confused with the Japanese Open Science Symposiums, because I see Moriyama-san, or yes, he's here right now. Hello, Moriyama-san. So they do have specialty like software reviewers that are part of that workflow. And when an editor-in-chief is looking at assigning reviewers to a paper, sometimes that paper is rather complex and they have to find different reviewers specific to their background. If it's modeling plus something else, they'll bring in multiple reviewers. But I would say in general, if you're thinking of data as a first-class research product, I would try to think more where the peer review is happening within the repository or within the creation life cycle. I think you'll have more consistency and you'll have access. Well, no, you're probably going to be challenged with the right credentials as well, because we don't have professionalization yet within data curation, data management yet. Although that would be another area to highlight. So, Matt, over to you.
Yeah, very interesting problem. I think I must admit I saw 12,000 and the publisher and me just panicked, because one of the massive issues that we face is finding reviewers. And this is one of the biggest problems that we face. And I mentioned it in my own slides as well. Editors from the journal side and publishers from the journal side, they're nervous of anything that increases reviewer fatigue and leads to longer turnaround times. It is very common to have tens of rejections of reviewers per manuscript before you get there. So I can't really answer the question. I think it would introduce a lot of logistical complexities, but I think there could be potential for a way to sort of collaborate within this space, right? We both have this issue of not being able to find reviewers. We have large numbers of data sets coming through, and then the papers that result from them. If you know that data has been well reviewed beforehand, it may be that you're able to introduce some kind of repository to journal streamlined workflow, for instance. But that would be very bespoke, and I think you'll need to be good arrangements put in place between the publisher and the repository directly. That, for instance, the journals that I manage, there wouldn't be those links at the moment, and it would be difficult to envisage them. But doesn't mean that, I guess, in theory, it wouldn't be possible if this is the direction of travel and there's appetite for it.
Yeah. And then, compounding this is that not all of the data types have repositories that you could even find to work with you in that, even if you were to go that bespoke route. But Shelley, you were going to say
it's
something.
really important for everyone here to know that the generalist repositories are actively pursuing technical linkages between publishers and the publishing editorial manager workflow. Matt, help me remember everybody. Dryad has a tool. I think Figshare does too, do they not?
Yeah, I think, yes, they do.
Okay. And this is something that even AGU got stuck on. There was they have some really active campaigning happening. So when a respected repository, and I'm saying generalist, right? Not discipline, when a respected repository comes to a publishing house and says, hey, I've got an easy answer for your authors. All you have to do is put this link here and it will solve all your problems, right? Like the magic happens behind this wall. A lot of publishers are doing this because they don't know any better. They don't know that this is actually not okay. And at AGU, that happened. We were about to implement that link. I didn't know about it. And I'm like, when I heard, I'm like, oh no, can't do that because we already have issues getting the data to discipline specific repositories. That will end the game right there. So that's a real barrier.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Shelley. Kirsten, you rejoined. Is there anything you wanted to follow up on?
But I just listened to Shelley, and it's interesting because I was at a meeting last week where we had the Environmental Data Initiative here in the US at the table, and we were talking about, how to guide researchers in a specific research program where they should submit their data. And she said, in our community, you can't submit to anywhere else but Riot because it's built into the manuscript process. You just click the button. And so nobody will submit to EarthChem because, that's the predetermined archive.
And so that opportunity for domain curation, the really deep reusability piece, interoperability and reusability, that opportunity is now gone. Yeah. So this is very challenging, and Shelley alluded to the work that was done prior, and when we get into the case statement sections, we definitely call out the prior work that was done through RDA, not just the most recent with the repository criteria, but there was a data publication workflows years ago that had come up with a nice idyllic workflow that we all know the reason we're here is because that it was maybe too ideal and not practical. But before I jump into that, we still have Matt, who is up for speaking from the Taylor and Francis, or the publisher and journal perspective. So apologies, Matt, and please take it away. Do you have slides in there? I will reshare. Let's see my screen.
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. I do have one slide in there, but otherwise
Okay.
I can go rogue if you need me to go rogue.
No problem. No problem. Just take a moment here. Do you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, so let me just advance to there.
Yeah. Yeah, so this was just very briefly some of the in some of the previous RDA groups, we're sort of discussing some of the possible bottlenecks or issues you might see when considering this from the perspective of the publisher. So here I've outlined a few of the kind of more general challenges that publishers might face in terms of trying to improve peer review links between journals and domain-specific repositories, and by no means exhaustive and by no means sort of unsurpassable. But these are sort of some commonly held concerns that I've heard and that I've encountered. And so one could be from the journal's perspective, staffing capacity. I think there's often an assumption that publishers are staffed to the gills, but they're not. And so anything that requires introduction of more to and fro, there is going to have to be a person that's going to do that. And I mean, as Kirsten was saying, it's a challenge. She identified that she'd need 6 FTE posts there. The same kind of issue trickles into publishing whenever we're trying to coordinate these processes across hundreds and thousands of journals. That time really adds up. And you can automate a lot of it, and maybe there's a role for AI in some of this as we move forward. But yeah, the interesting problem. Costs and platforms, again, this is something that is important to consider. There are sometimes technical changes that need to be made to submission platforms. And then you get into the detail of how much is that going to cost? Depends whether you own your own platform, you own a bit of your own platform, bolt-on that you can use, or you need to go to a third party to make those kinds of changes, particularly if they're going to be journal-specific, bespoke changes at that level. And publishers, I think, generally try and push more because of the constraints that are exerted on them. They generally push towards things that work at scale. And I think this speaks to the point that Shelley was just making about why it's so attractive to publishers to go for the generalist publisher option, because it can be easily integrated into workflows, into submission platforms at scale, at reduced cost, and basically create a big net that can catch many, as opposed to having to proceed community by community, which can be difficult. Generally, too, I think editors, we encounter a degree between editors and societies that we partner with. We get different levels of understanding and about these processes, and they are often reluctant to introduce anything into a publication workflow that they deem to be overly complex. Anything that's going to put authors off, if they find out they have to wait for something to be reviewed or something like that in another place and then moved on, they worry that that's going to affect the bottom line for the journal. And that's understandable concern that we work hard to alleviate, but it's one that we hear a lot. And again, another point that we touched on is increased workload on editors, authors, and particularly reviewers. This is the one that I hear probably most. The community that we are most concerned about fatigue building up within is the review community. And so that is something that is forefront of our minds whenever we're thinking about potential pipeline disruption. And then, this last point is a bit more general, that we really have this this call, I think, for publishers often to be leading some of this kind of discussion, and I think publishers work to try and promote best practice and leadership where they can. But I think that kind of sustainable long-term change is better driven by bottom-up changes within the community and not top-down from publishers. I'd love to say that every author that submits to your journal reads the IFAs. They do not. And they find out stuff during the submission process that we have very clearly tried to signpost to them before they begin, maybe weeks or months before they try to begin a submission to the journal, but they don't often read that. So it has to be kind of embedded in the, information for authors. So this is what you would have, where you would, particularly I'm working with a journal at the moment that's moving to a more open data sharing policy, and we're going to be clearly marking which repositories that they should be going to, but there's no guarantee that the authors are going to read that, and that's that's an ongoing challenge. But it's better if it's rooted in the community, that there's an expectation that there are particular repositories that they go to, I think. And that's really all that I had on that.
Thanks, Matt. That was actually really informational and educational. I had no idea that that within one publisher there would be maybe bespoke infrastructure by journal or even workflows. I just assumed it was very standardized across all journals within a publisher. So thank you for that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very variable. And the other thing that's important to note as well, particularly a company like TNF that publishes about half of my portfolio is society journals, that we are simply the publishing partner for, which means that we actually don't control editorial policy. They control editorial policy. We facilitate their editorial policy. So it's not something that we can unilaterally roll out on their journals without their permission or the permission of their societies. And often those societies will have publishing committees themselves that we'd need to consult first.
So it's very complex. It's sort of this publishing onion. The other thing I wanted to just comment on when you were finishing up talking about I just lost my thought. The last comment you made about working with repositories, and some journals have this, you're careful not to make the author workflow more complex, and you can sometimes guide people to a repository, or you have a recommended repository. But for the repositories, it's really hard to know how to get on a list of a preferred, as a preferred repository or a journal and even if you want to get on, what the process is and how you do that, I think it would be great if there were some, and hopefully that's what this repository criteria, can help, this working group can help with. So I don't want to monopolize here because I have all these questions. So does anybody have any comments or questions for Matt from the journal perspective side? I see AGU calls it author guidelines. There's obviously all these stakeholder specific acronyms that we're not educated to either. So it's interesting. Okay, well, thank you very much, Matt, for the journal perspective, and Kirsten for the very unique challenges of Astromat. What we'd like to do now is sort of shift to this discussion of the working group and the proposed working group that's trying to tackle this very sort of niche workflow challenge here. As I said, my timeline was outdated, and apologies for that. So the group has been meeting, and we've had a couple meetings under our belt, primarily to work on a case statement for submitting to RDA for endorsement and to get the working group going. The working group broadly has these goals. And before I jump into this, then the remainder of the time, we're really hoping that we can share with you components of the case statement for sort of live review and a gut check on whether we're headed in the right direction. We've been sort of massaging this over the last 2 meetings with comments provided asynchronously into this Google Doc where we have the case statement, and that is linked in the notes, I believe, or maybe we can drop that in there as well. But really, we're hoping we're coming to alignment with everybody that's been joining the group on what we want to do, what is valuable to the community. And this session right now is sort of whoever's on the line, we want to kind of have the gut check. And if there's any last things that we've missed or we should really work on refining, I admit that, saving Shelley and Leslie, who are our sort of veteran RDA co-chairs here, the rest of us are relatively green as to how RDA processing works. So we're hoping we're coming up on this finalization of the case statement to submit and then get rolling on actually doing some work. So broadly, we hope to engage all these stakeholders, and the primaries being the repositories, the publishers, and hopefully authors down the line, to educate each other on this juxtaposition of the data and the scholarly publication processes, hopefully spark some collaboration between repository and publishers to kind of educate about the workflows, and maybe streamline, eventually produce some guidance for stakeholders in the form of these recommendations. We would be producing sort of this set for repositories and a set for publishers and journals, that would start to sort of grease the skids, if you will, on the data publication to get that DOI into the scholarly publication. So I put a note in here on this slide because one of the first challenges we hit as we were meeting as a broader RDA group was our focus. And this started because of this problem sort of bubbled up in my repository, and I'm sitting here in the US with a geoscience hat on, and I started reaching out to the repositories that I collaborate with and know. And of course, Kirsten was the first to raise her hand and say, oh yes, this is a problem for me as well. Kirsten Elger, and I'm blanking on her JFZ. I don't know the title of hers, from Germany, also had this problem, but we're all sitting in the geosciences. And so one of the first comments was, is this narrowly focused? And the group decided that we are going to focus on these because these are the most engaged repository stakeholders right now, and as well on the publisher side. But that's not to say that any recommendations couldn't be extensible across disciplinary domains outside of the geosciences, say for the health sciences or something along those lines. And if people from those domains are enthusiastic to engage with us, we certainly will take the help and ensure that whatever we come up with is sort of broadly applicable. So that's where we're starting from our goals. And I'll just pause here in case anybody has any questions or comments there. Okay, so I think for the remaining time, what we'd like to do is just jump into the case statement, and which is here, and then sort of chunk through these sections that RDA requires. And I believe almost every section we have sort of, here's what we've decided to do, highlight that, and here's maybe something to pose to you all as a broader group of participants during this session. So as a charter, we start out with this sort of broad statement at the top of our case statement. But really what we're getting into is improve collaboration and coordination between the repository and the publisher workflows. That's really the meat of what we're trying to do. And then we kind of get down into some of the proposed deliverables. We would love to attack this workflow. We're staying in the earth space and environmental science disciplinary focus. We acknowledge and advance prior work on this sort of workflow, this data publication workflow. We plan to engage these stakeholders and solicit feedback through a mechanism of collecting use cases, develop a set of recommendations, and then of course distribute those. And then there's a little bit of our sort of working history so far. So this is sort of it in a nutshell, just to kind of orient everybody. When we get down into specific objectives, this is the set that we've been working on. So some of them are sort of outcomes, right? We're going to establish a shared understanding. We're going to look at these detailed requirements of both of these publication stakeholders. On the data side with the repository, we're going to look at the timeline with the researchers. And that includes best practices for timing of deposition and how long it takes repositories to do their appraisal. Hopefully communicate the value of disciplinary repositories to the broader stakeholder community over just, what are they called? The push button repositories. And then on the journal side, talk about this. So the data availability statement and the citation for the authors, and what those journal needs are. And I'm going to let either Shelley or Matt jump in here in case I've, go astray on the journal side. And also their preferred timing of things. So repositories have a preferred timing, and most certainly the publishers have a preferred timing. So one of the biggest things is like socially an outcome to sort of educate all of the stakeholders on what the needs are from both sides. And during that process, we hope to solicit some use cases, at least from the repository side. For example, as Kirsten's Astromat, I have a similar issue with an oceanographic repository. And we're going to gather some use cases by interviewing repositories. That will end up with a compendium of these, which will inform the other two outputs. We're going to hopefully create visual models of these workflows that accurately represent, or maybe broadly represent, the data publication and the scholarly publication, with maybe some refinement or some bespoke alternative flows. And then this set of recommendations that we hope to distribute that will work on easing this relationship between the two, these two entities. So that's really it. And I'm going to pause here too to hear if anybody has any comments or questions with this. Or maybe it's too early on some time zones for anybody to poke at, but we definitely are looking for, you know, for critical thoughts on this, and feel free to poke it because we've been working on it. It's great if there aren't any. That means maybe we're in a really good space right now to hopefully move this on to RDA for endorsement. Yes, Moriyama-san.
Thank you very much. Uh, I, at first, yeah, I would like to apologize if my English is too much to see because I'm now having some trouble in sleeping cycle and body fatigue as I
Oh,
was told by my doctor, and so they yeah, this is a 12 p. Midnight in Japan. Anyway, and in my experience of the interim chief editor in European data journals, and I had to find a big difficulty to find data reviewers. So the community has some lack of the reviewer base or workforce of the two and you're focusing on the workflow and pipelines, and it is very nice approach, I think. But the workforce issues or development of their experts or data reviewer or potential data reviewers could be another kind of the building blocks. Or so is it right understanding? Just I want to make sure that the community needs to develop the data reviewers, and the community needs to develop the good pipeline, good workflows. Is it the right understanding?
well, I think not. First, thank you. I appreciate you getting on this hour, and English is fine.
Sorry. Thank you very much.
I think that the interesting, I'm just gonna look in the chat. The interesting piece on the repository side and the journal side that Kirsten in her presentation was the first of the repositories that I know of that actually had a data review process at the repository level. And it sounds like there are very few, if any, journals that have a data review process sort of explicitly baked into their publication pipeline. But I will let the publishers in the room clarify that. So it would be great if we had this entity, this sort of data peer review persona or role. And I don't know where they would sit. If it would be great if they sat at the, you know, at a repository level or at a journal level. From my perspective, they don't really exist right now. But Shelley, go ahead. I see your hands up.
Yeah, I think I would push back a little bit on the statement that you made. And mostly it comes from some of when you and I met a long time ago, you actually helped me understand how a data manager, a data curator takes a look at a data set and the things that you can comment back to the researcher. But there are things that you also stay away from, like this is part of the science. We don't touch this. We look at, you know, primarily the metadata or the outliers of salinity or such. And it's similar within publishing. So AGU just did well, we call it a pilot, but it was we have the luxury of only 24 journals, so we can work with the journal teams individually, unlike larger publishing houses. So we worked with each of our teams to help them understand, first of all, what it meant to recognize the data within a paper, the data availability statement, data in the reference section, and what to look for from that point of view. and that when you click on the URL, it may not be a DOI. It's commonly not a DOI, sadly. When you look at the FTP site, when you look at wherever the data actually are, you have to take into consideration who owns it, who has authority to put it into a repository. So you have all those use cases, and you still haven't looked at the data. So when you finally look at the data, what we say that the peer reviewer has the ability to see the data, not that they are required to go look at the data. This helps with the type of research, how important that, the time involved, their expertise. It allows flexibility. So, for instance, early on when we started the pilot, 2018, 2019, that time frame, we found that in order to meet the criteria that AGU understood at the moment, this particular author used a URL that had the word data in it. It had nothing to do with research. And that was given to us as a resolution for where their data set was located. They assumed we would never look. Well, we did, and we got that fixed. So it's everything from a legit location to, is that the data that supported the research, or is there any data missing? And we didn't even get to, is that enough data for that research? So there are definitely levels here.
Yeah, I apologize for making that broad statement. I guess in my mind, I was thinking the like data peer review as what Kirsten was referencing. So at that deep level of, hey, are these values appropriate? Is there any QC that's gone on? And the interesting thing from a repository standpoint is that we make those data available. We make those data available for the scholarly peer review, but we have no idea right now if anybody's actually coming to look at them. And nobody's ever said, oh, my author gave me a DOI that's not active. I can't even see the data. No journal or reviewer or publisher has ever come in to BCODemo and said, we have an author who gave us this, inactive DOI and I can't see anything. So we don't know if it's actually happening or not. Like if people are actually going to the repository and checking to see if that is in fact data that is related to the scholarly publication.
That's incredible feedback. Oh, Graham's gonna, okay. I'll let Graham talk because he's got a lot of experience in this from a publishing point of view. But so we have confidentiality around our peer review. We actually don't want you to know that we went and looked. So maybe there's a way for us to help.
Oh,
indicate.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I want to hear Graham too, but we're designing infrastructure right now that allows for anonymous access to the data even before we curate it. And we're moving in that direction so that we can provide a preliminary DOI, and hopefully using the complex citation output coming up, we'll be able to point to a polished final, curated DOI. But anyway, point is, we are trying to respond to this need, but please, Graham, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm Graham Smith. I'm the Open Data Program Manager at Springer Nature. So yeah, we're thinking about this from the perspective of, say, 3,500 journals, trying to get things in place which work, thinking about a lot of the challenges that Matt raised. And when we're trying to prioritize how we work with repositories and how we work with research data, it can be a challenge getting this onto the priorities of the overall changes, standardizations we want to make. And really, the approach that we've had is we need to really focus on this as a behavior change issue. I feel like this issue of behavior change quite often gets boiled down to an issue of just considering it as a motivations for the researcher, just thinking, well, if we force them to do it or if we make it more appealing, that'll work. One of the ways that we found is actually it's this approach that we do need to make the solutions more accessible. And I agree with all of the points that, ideally the domain-specific repository would be used in every case. Ideally, everything would be curated. Ideally, This would all be happening in a very interlinked way where you knew exactly who was doing what, which reviewers were looking at the data. I feel like we're some way off that, and that gap has existed for a while between the sort of best practice and everything else. And hence we've taken the steps of trying to layer on just sort of better practice with a view to getting towards that best practice. We have a journal of scientific data that for quite a long time has practiced data curation alongside data peer review. The ability to roll out any of those processes to our other journals, including journals within the Nature portfolio, where you're much less likely to scare off authors by adding in more requirements. It's difficult, even there, thinking about it that way. And that's why I would slightly push back on some of the sentiments against generalist repositories, I would say. I fully agree that, these things data sets should be in domain-specific repositories, ideally. We always say that in our guidance. We do have an integration generalist repository. Some of the things that has helped us to do are what you were just talking about. So, for example, we can track interactions with peer reviewers and data sets. It also means that we've got the ability to add in checks on our side in a way that they don't really happen in a black box to the same extent. Now, again, I'm not saying these go the full level of data peer review or curation by domain-specific expert, but if you take Dryad, for example, it's curation in a generalist repository. We do work with Dryad. If we send that data out, we essentially don't know what's happening for quite a long time. And there is a big pressure on us to sort of reduce anything we add in. If we go in saying, this is going to add in a lot more work, a lot more touch points, and we have no idea when you're even going to get the data back. That really doesn't fly with a lot of the sort of standardization or the appeal for journal editors. One of the things that we can do is say, well, if we can control some level of these checks, if we can layer on things like potential screening or maybe even automated screening in the future that can complement the human, that's kind of within our gift. Hence, we've taken this approach of saying, well, generalist repositories can fill a gap for some researchers, but they're not meant to sort of cannibalize or take away from domain-specific repositories. That's the point I would sort of make on that. But broadly, I would say for this overall endeavor, it seems really worthwhile and we'd like to get behind it. But if we end up with something that's just another best practice that's inaccessible, I think that's going to be a real challenge in that case. And that's the challenge we have. We have the COPDES enabling fair data in earth sciences. We're committed to that as well for a number of journals, and it works well building these kind of community activities, I think. But again, trying to roll it out across an entire system, sometimes focusing on integration and making it easier does have its place. I think that's the point I would make. Sorry, that was a very long statement, which maybe didn't end in a question, but it's really that gap, I would say, between the best practice and what's actually achievable that I would highlight.
I appreciate that. I fully and your number of individual journals that you would be working with is staggering to hear as well. I would love to even put to all of the journals that were or the publishers on this call in just maybe putting something in the back of your minds about the relationships that you do create with generalist repositories, and fully understanding that there are disciplines that don't have a specific domain repository to even work with. But I'm interested in your take on if you go to the generalist repositories to start up these relationships to make these integrations because they are so broadly interdisciplinary, or is it because it's just the ease of making those workflows with them? Because I would venture, to you all that there may be disciplinary repositories that are capable of functioning in that space as well to make these integrations. I guess there are more of them. You would have to do it, that many sub-disciplines that you would want to work with, but they may have the capacity to do what you're doing with the generalist repositories. Just throwing that out there. And I see Snowden or Tracy, sorry.
That's okay. You can call me by my first name or last. So first of all, Shelley had mentioned this to me today, and I've been reluctant to say or to share anything, but I'd like to piggyback off of what Graham has shared just a little bit. And this is really just food for thought, because I echo the sentiment that that he shared about, and if there is a domain specific repository, that it should go there. And the reason I say that is because I am a product manager for a generalist repository, Mendeley Data, and I'm also a co-chair for GRAY, which is the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative. And one of the things that I've noticed, I've recently attended the DRKB program meeting at the NIH, and there really is what I believe to be quite a genuine trend and desire to see interoperability where it makes sense across the board, right? And for even something like the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative to expand in a future state to include domain-specific repositories for the purpose of ensuring that there's interoperability of DOIs in between data sets. So it's been very educational for me, and just even hearing things referred to the push button repository. When I was at the program meeting, there were a lot of kind of similar things said and statements made that I don't find offensive at all. It's very interesting to see the other side. So I think the thing that I would offer is, maybe in this process, the inclusion of some of these generalist repositories in the conversation to simply see, or some of these initiatives to simply see, how can we think long-term and work together to those ends? Because to Graham's point, you don't just want another best practice, you want a change in the ecosystem that's positive for the entire community, right? So that's all that I would offer. If there's anything, also as a representative of Elsevier, if there are introductions that I could make, on the publisher side or the journal side, I've already hit up a colleague. Please, feel free to let me know. But I know I'm intrigued by environmental sciences, but obviously as a generalist repository product manager, I don't know the needs and the intricacies of that. So that I have to kind of stand back from that, but just some bigger picture food for thought.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you attending and B, your comments. And, I hope it's not this, this big, bad, pejorative kind of view, perspective, because I will say that my repository as an oceanographic repository, we have a reciprocal, we try to have a reciprocal relationship with Dryad. So we've struck up, these, when data come in that are inappropriate for us, they're maybe cultural data or non-tabular data, we recommend Dryad, and then we use the links reciprocally to point to the related content. So we do work with generalist repositories as well as a disciplinary specific.
And just to piggyback off of that, I will mention that, in speaking with intramural researchers more on the health sciences side, we are seeing a trend of people utilizing multiple repositories for varying reasons. So I think that would be something really interesting to investigate as researcher behavior, to understand what are people doing now and why, and is there something that we could do to circumvent that? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I think it would be great to, to make that relationship when they are either endeavoring or maybe funder nudged to these multiple disparate distributed data resources for sharing, make that as easy as possible, but also on the end user side, which is downstream of or sort of distinct from the publisher once that publication comes out. But we want to make sure that all the data are discoverable as well. So if data related to an oceanographic expedition sits at Dryad and say EarthChem and Kirsten's repository, and also NIH, we want to make sure it's all discoverable as a corpus from my repository. And so we're working with these others on this sort of federated access and relationship. So we want to make it easy for the end user, but easy for the submitter as well. And I think that this particular piece is in that like frantic, oh my gosh, I haven't deposited my data yet, but my publication has been accepted. That moment is where we want to focus on and kind of sort of drill down in being very sensitive. So I hope that you all stay on this group and help contribute to this, because it is it is primarily culture and education, as Graham was leading to. Like, I think a lot of it's social and a lot of it is cultural, what the cultural norm is. And so, just educating, I've learned so much on the publisher side just from listening to you all speak, that it's great information that repositories just don't have. And I think that a lot of the researchers that come to us don't necessarily know what the bounds are of their timing. And so we can give them a URL for say a data availability statement while we're working on the data for the DOI. And that buys us some time. So these like educational pieces, and then, hopefully the recommendations are just sort of codifying what we've spoken about. And, it just kind of helps the culture change. It shouldn't be heavy and imposing, because not everybody will be able to meet everything that we're talking about. So I really appreciate your comments and ideas. So thank you very much for that. And I hope you stay engaged with the group.
Thank you.
So it sounds like we had great conversation, and it sounds like as long as we are sensitive to the fact that these aren't going to be heavy recommendations, one of them is even just an educational one. This visual model should be helping everybody understand, oh, this is why, the researcher comes to us in a frantic, they really aren't aware of the needs on either side. So it's more of an educational instrument than necessarily like you must fit into a workflow. It's more of a vehicle to kind of help that socialization, if that makes sense. Okay, so I think I'm going to move on to the next, if I can get over to my slide, the next slide here. So part of the case statement for RDA is a value proposition. And the group has met a couple times, and this case statement that I shared in the chat, or that was shared in the slide earlier, there were a couple comments on the value proposition just wasn't there to kind of communicate what we're trying to do. So the group that has met the last couple meetings tried to rework this. And I know this is a lot of text heavy, and I'll give you a moment to kind of just focus in on the highlighted sections are things that we included to kind of demonstrate this challenge from the perspectives of the stakeholders, and then really sort of home in on why we're doing it. And I'll give a moment to let everybody sort of read through that, and then just get your feedback on this. So as you finish up or you think about this, one of the challenges I personally have is that I am relatively new to this whole process in RDA, and what will pass as a case statement or a value proposition within a case statement. So I don't know, this we feel comfortable on the repository side, but from a publisher perspective, if that sort of does this resonate with everyone here? And is there anything that we should be looking to focus in on? Matt. Hi there.
Hi, Danny. Hi, everyone. Hi, Shelley. Hi, Graham. Hi, Matt. So lots of familiar faces. So yeah, nice to see you all. Something that I was thinking that this group was going to be about, I know I've spoken to some of you before and seen some of the earlier versions of this, but I think one of the potential values of doing this sort of work better is having a better, I don't know what the right word is, like more successful links. So like if we can iron out this workflow and all the timings, there should be more links in articles that point to live data and more links on the data that links to the articles. Because I think like having the data in a repository will be progress, and that's good, but I wonder if one of the benefits of having this all ironed out is there should be better links and more accurate links and links that work. And those links are really the value, a lot of the value. And so I guess I don't see the word link in there. And I think that was one of the things that I wanted to say.
Could I hop on Matt's comment? I mean, I think what he's demonstrating is how we measure success.
Mhm.
And I know he came in a little bit later, but what at the top of the meeting, I was talking about the number of links that AGU has in their papers, and we track that. And it's actually a proxy for success, right? Like the way we do it is just easier to do automatically, but it's literally the links, and we know which repository, and I don't know if Kirsten Leonard is still on, but EarthChem is of the discipline specific repositories where the data lands, EarthChem is the highest number. And now you must ask yourself, why is that? Kirsten spends a lot of time connecting to researchers. She makes sure they know her repository is the one for them. And that's not every repository has that capacity to do that. But I would say, like for AGU, for this to be successful, I would say for our generalist repository number should go from over 70% down and become less. What I don't know is how less, because there's very legit data that should land in a generalist repository. I just don't know that number.
I fully appreciate what you're saying, Matt, and I definitely think we should. It's exactly what I was thinking, Shelley, that this is your proxy for success. And interestingly, as we were talking about it, I don't know that there is a section in the case statement template that says how will you, it's how will you distribute and promote adoption, but there's no like the other shoe never drops, and like how do you measure if you were successful? And this is absolutely one way we can do this. I also want to give a huge shout out to Kirsten. She's not on here, but prior to DOIs being a thing in a publication, Kirsten had an amazing developer who was scraping content and hand incorporating references to publications in her repository metadata. So she, Lamont, her whole section has there's another repository for oceanography, rolling Decta repository. Lamont, very heavy on geoscience repositories. They were so proactive that they did this early. So Shelley, to your point, they show up highly. They were doing it by hand before it was a thing. And, we tried sort of here and there, but it's a lot to stay on top of. I think they had somebody who just enjoyed doing that for a Friday evening with popcorn and soda. I honestly don't know how they did it, but you may see higher numbers there because of that. Like it might be about little bias, but the end goal is the same, right? We hope that all those links show up. And I think that's a great comment for us to work into. So thank you for that, Matt. Any others? Sure, Graham.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of the case statement, maybe how it relates to the overall name of the group, I would say it seems broader than data preservation. For me has a very specific meaning, and it's sort of honed in on paper peer review. This seems broader. This is all about data deposition, preservation, sharing, and it's about the entire publication process, including peer review. It feels like this is a broader piece of work. I totally agree on the idea that, yes, we do need this sort of consensus that you mentioned over the workflow. Even the conversation so far, I think, has highlighted some of the really useful aspects. Different aspects of this workflow are going to be of different levels of use, or I guess priority for different stakeholders here. But for example, what Tracy was mentioning about the the interoperability between repositories. This is a massive thing for us. This would be really useful because one of the challenges we originally had was there's thousands of repositories out there. We can't just point researchers to all of them. So we create our own guidelines for it. There was some pushback from the idea of whether publishers should be the ones creating these guidelines. Matt, your group now that's looking on repository attributes really grew from that, but it hasn't really left us with a solution. And a solution that would be, okay, you might get to a generalist repository, but you actually get directed to the right repository if you're out of scope. That would kind of be the ideal thing. And if not, you can go ahead and use it. Right now, we're trying to do that in a very cursory way of just telling an author, basically when they get to the integration with the repository, there may be other repositories in this area. go and look at this guidance to do it. But that is also sort of ripe for these areas of automation. I'm sure people will be looking at. It's just there isn't a solution that really works. If we can really identify those through that mapping of that workflow, I think this could be really useful. But like I said previously, that compared to just here's what best practice should look like without that consideration how we should get there, I think that would be really useful for us anyway.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think at some point this group will have to decide on like where our scope stops and what's tractable for us versus like being sensitive to also all of Matt's comments about like what would need to be implemented too. I think there's got to be some sweet spot in there that allows this workflow to happen a little better. But I obviously defer to the broader working group consensus here on what things we can accomplish. So I appreciate and hear what you're saying. Any other comments? And I think I see Natalie is doing amazingly detailed notes here, so thank you, Natalie. And all of this content will be distilled by the working group, which we'll get to. I see we're down to about 10 minutes left in our session, and I don't know how far we've gotten in our little case statement. Not too far. And maybe we've already gotten to some of these points. And I'm trying to think of my this is more specific on the nuts and bolts of the RDA requirements for the value proposition here. But
may I jump in? So it might be good, Graham's point about the title, he's right. I agree with him. The title for the group, because it's not just data preservation, it's really deciding on the repository, the deposition process, why you went to that repository, the time it takes. And one of the reasons we use the word peer review, if I remember back now years, was because we wanted to, we're not talking about preprints, we're talking about scholarly communication that includes peer review, where peer review is where looking at the data is the moment in time. And I think that's why we have those words. But yes, it's not just peer review. It's the guidance that goes to the authors. It's your policy. It's the guidance. It's at the moment of accept. It's the linkages. It's the so it's quite broader, as you say.
I would following on to that. This title of the working group has been decidedly nebulous over the the timeline that we showed in the beginning. It's sort of touched around a bunch of these activities in the title. And even if you look at our session notes right now, I'm trying to see what we call them, coordinating Earth and space and environmental science, data preservation and scholarly publication process. So we even dropped the sort of peer review. But I would appreciate that if you have specific ideas and rationale behind what we should include in this working group title and what we shouldn't, scope wise, to feel free to add it to the notes. They should be accessible to everyone and they're collaborative notes. So please add your thoughts there. I don't think the group is married to any particular set of descriptive terms in there. So we want to make sure we get it right by everyone who feels, included in this group. So to the degree that you have specific comments on what should be included there, I think we're definitely open to that. And there, I do want to get to this section here that you see now before. So we have maybe 9 minutes and we want to give everybody a last like, hurrah, please come join the group kind of cheerleading slide there. But I think this is more getting at, do we have the right people in the room? And are we missing any stakeholders here? And so from the value proposition, digging into who we plan to engage and who would be adopters, and from the perspective of the stakeholders who we have here to get feedback on, looking at repositories at the highest level, and now being sensitive to it, including maybe these forums where the more generalist repositories are engaged in. Do we have the right avenues for engagement and adoption here? The repositories, we picked these big in the US, and then sort of RDA and the WDS to grab these international ones. But if there's anything that we're missing there, please feel free to either unmute or add it to the notes. And then likewise for journal publishers, and thanks to Matt for the nuances here about at the journal level and then at the publisher level. This was through the lens of adoption here. But also, if you have thoughts on journal specific or publisher specific kind of forums or places we should plug into to get perspective. I'm so appreciative for all of you guys for showing up. This is great. I think this is the most number of publishers we've had on the Hollywood Squares yet. So kudos to you all.
You've got a good group here.
Yeah,
if
this
the
is
group
great.
agrees on everything, then you're solid. I mean, we can convince everybody else, I'm pretty sure.
So the last number in there, right? 3 researchers and other data producers or others data producing stakeholders. And I put in there funders. Do funders play a role here? Because specifically my repository, we have a very tight coupling to our funder, and the challenge we face is that they're required to use us through the National Science Foundation. We are a designated repository for oceanography. And when they do jump the ranks and go out, it creates all kinds of challenges. The funder comes down on us like, why aren't these DOIs, at your repository? And when we find out that they just went to Dryad and we didn't know about it. And so, there are those sort of workflow challenges here. And I'm wondering if anybody else sees funders as playing a role here. I think they're hard to garner. They're hard to get into the room, but, is there value in including them here?
Yes, but you come at them a different way. Like the reason I'm in California is I'm actually meeting with the Moore Foundation today, and they are very keen on data being valuable. That's Danny knows I was at a pre-meeting last night, which is why my voice sounds weird because my times are so bad right now. They do care, and the way you can bring this to them is through RDA's Funders Forum. You can actually there's co-chairs for that, and you can ask to do a presentation. I think that would make perfect sense, especially coming into Costa Rica. It would be really perfect for you to present on this. And so putting a period on that and completely supporting you on that comment. The next comment is, I think it would be helpful if in your case statement you were more clear on assumptions and what is out of scope, because you were really looking at a piece of a very complicated puzzle. And I think we should say that, the journals are already, the journals have policies for data citation. Oh, I'm sorry about that. That you're not, that's being handled by somebody else, that there is a discipline-specific repository for the researcher. You're not trying to recommend a repository, which is a huge problem, because when, as Graham was saying, when we come to adopt this, I'll speak from AGU's point of view, we are in a lot of trouble, because if at the data help desk or the questions that can come in from any researcher, what repository should I use? I'm at a loss. Like I literally send a note to all the repository people and say, where should the data go? Like that's not efficient. That's not streamlined. That is not a workflow. That is a hack. And I can do it because I have time, but Graham can't. Graham can't do it. Matt can't do it. Other Matt can't do it. They can't. It's just crazy. So the community of practice, the Earth and Space Science community of practice, which will be in a number of hours for me, tomorrow for some of you, is one of the things that I'm recommending for that community of practice is to dig into that as a community so that we come up with the discipline-specific recommended repositories for our researchers and take it out of the hands of a publisher and into the hands of our researchers so that there's an endorsement of these repositories. And then where there isn't one, so anyway, those are I think we should bound this work and help everyone understand that there's other pieces to the puzzle.
I appreciate that. I think that's great. Yes. You happy? Okay. 3 minutes left to go, and so many more slides that we didn't get to. So I'm going to zip through them down to the, oh, please, let's wrap up. But oh, please join our group. Let's see if I can actually get to the slides. Engagement with different existing work. This is all in the case statement that's in the bit.ly. So, and the document is open for comment. So as we're wrapping through this work plan, you'll see all of this in the document. Adoption plan we kind of touched on, and stakeholders who would adopt it. This is a sort of standard RDA session, like coming up with summarizing our key points and key outcomes. I wouldn't worry about the summarization, but if you feel, this group right now, if you feel like, hey, I feel these are the top 3 that we should work on. I know one of them is sort of our scope and bounds, I think is a fair one there. But if there are any others that you feel we should kind of, or that bubble up to the top, that we should be working on as we refine this case statement, feel free, speak now. And I realized, Matt, I sort of had you tagged for this section, so I didn't mean to sort of stomp all over your time.
Oh,
here.
you go ahead. That's absolutely fine.
If not, then we'll just, we as a group will kind of pull these out of our notes and fill this section in. But if there's anything that sticks out, feel free to add it to the notes as well as we're sort of wrapping up. And then this is just our sort of thank you all for coming, and here are the next steps slide. We have monthly meetings. And if you look on the right-hand side of this, this slide, you'll see the bit.ly, the repo to pub working group, WG. If you visit that link, that goes to our proposed working groups RDA page, which I've been very challenged to kind of navigate now that the site has switched over, unfortunately. So I guess hang in there with us. And if you are able to join, that's great. Otherwise, we can certainly send an email to any of the co-chairs that are in the notes, and we'll be happy to include you in the meeting reminders. We meet monthly. Our next one is the 22nd of this month, and then June, and hopefully we'll be looking to have some good news on endorsement and the working group kind of being established by the time the next plenary comes along.
Danny, just quick note, that is
Yes.
not Europe friendly. Because I know Graham and Matt and a number of publishers are in Europe, the time may be something worth looking into.
Fair enough. I think we were trying to go even broader than Europe and grab everybody. So Europe folks were on the, but we can also switch off as well, that we've done before in other sort of broadly global groups. But, and we're happy, I'm not married to the time. I want to make sure we get as inclusive a time as we can. So happy to revisit that as well. And I'll defer to the rest of the group on a best time. And maybe we could, we sent out a doodle. Natalie sent out a doodle or a, when to meet early on, but we can revisit that if folks prefer. I know
Danny,
Matt's always up late. Yes, go ahead, Leslie.
San has asked, is there a link to the slides? The slides are actually linked in the
notes.
Session notes.
Yes.
I think I put the link in.
It's up at the top, I think.
Yeah. So if you go to the session notes that are on the session page, you'll get the slides.
And I just want to thank everybody. We're 2 minutes past. This was great discussion. I really appreciate everybody's contributions and showing up. And I thank everyone on behalf of our co-chairs. And Natalie, Matt, Leslie, and Shelley, thank you as well. And hopefully we will look for you to join the group and continue the contributions. So thanks again, everyone. I think we're good. Yeah.
Danny, can you make the slides open for everyone? I think there's permissions.
I can, definitely. Absolutely. All right. I don't know if Bridget ends up